For Carol to get back, relax, start in just a Hi, Carol. I'm going to invite you to stage.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good, yay. When tech works. Nice to meet you, Amber.
Nice to meet you. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. Okay, everything's set up. All right, let's wait one more minute before we start. I just want a couple more people to jump right in. But how are you doing today? Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's been a busy day, but it's good. It's great to be here. Good to see you. Thanks for pinch hitting, given the jury duty unexpected news.
Yes, I'm subbing in for Susan because she unfortunately has jury duty today, which, you know, I don't know if anyone's excited for that. But don't worry, she'll be back soon.
It's okay. And are you calling in from California today?
Yes, I'm from San Diego, California. I don't have an interesting bookshelf behind me. I have like a weird, you know, whatever, but I am here and I'm ready to go. So it's 4:01, so I think we're just gonna start. Hello, Firesiders. Welcome to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people and communities through the superpower of books. I'm your host, Amber Reinhart, and I'm delighted today to be hosting award-winning author Carol Van Den Hende to chat about her new novel, Orchid Blooming. And I have it right here, the advanced copy. I read this in a couple days, and I loved it. Thank you, Carol. Excited to chat about it today for sure. Today's Fireside Chat is part 5 of a 6-part series, and each week we've been chatting with a different author about a different book to help you plan your fall reading series. So, you know, tune in next week. And if you haven't caught our past episodes, you can do so on our YouTube channel. So make sure to check that out. Today's Fireside Chat is approximately 45 minutes with Carol, and it's intended as a conversation. So for those of you in the audience who are in the Fireside app right now, if you feel like you want to jump on stage and ask Carol a question directly, you can do so with your video monitor on, or you can just ask verbally. Either way is great. We want to hear from you. And make sure to click the bottom circle corner. There's like an icon that looks like a hamburger. If you click on that, you can broadcast this to all of your social media channels. I don't know if Debbie in the audience has just done that. So thank you, Debbie. And for those of you listening live on our Fireside public profile and tuning in on any other social media channel, we want to thank you so much for being here today. And again, if you haven't already ordered your book of Orchid Blooming, we would love you to do so on our website at adventuresbythebook.com. We will ship this directly to you at your convenience, so you can get this as soon as later this week, if possible. But we're going to get started and jump right in with Carol. So Carol Van Den Hende is the award-winning author of Goodbye Orchid, which won the American Fiction Award, the Pinnacle Achievement Award, IAN for Best First Novel Award, 2 Royal Dragonflies, received an honorable mention in NY Book Festival, and was a finalist in the Best Book Awards. Wow, Carol, that is so impressive. When she's not penning stories of resilience and hope, Carol applies her MBA to marketing and strategy. Her novel, Orchid Blooming, is the captivating first book in the Goodbye Orchid series. And so we're just going to get started and jump right in. Carol, thank you so much for being here today, and welcome and congratulations on the new book.
Oh, thanks so much for the warm welcome, Amber. It's awesome to be here with you. I appreciate those kind words.
Oh, yes, of course. I mean, very impressive bio, and, your books are very great, so I'm so excited to chat about that. So first off, we'd like to get started by learning a little bit about before you were a successful writer. So can you talk about where you grew up and your first exposure to books, and if there were any really prominent books or authors that kind of paved the path for you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the origin story is very funny and interesting because one part of my story is not going to be unique. I know a lot of authors say they loved books from an early age, and that was true for me too. Other kids were asking to be taken to the playground or the amusement park, but no, I wanted to go to the library and come out with a stack of books. That was me. And I was even writing stories at a young age, writing stories and journaling. It had always been a part of my life. And so when I was going to college, here's the funny part. I thought I was going to be an English major, but my very traditional, nice Chinese family sat me down and said, you're really good at math and science. So maybe you should try one of those majors, which completely changed my trajectory. I ended up with an engineering degree, worked in digital technologies, got my MBA, worked in marketing strategy in the US and in China. I don't regret it. It actually was very fun, very challenging, lots to learn, worked on great brands like M&M's, Snickers, Three Musketeers, Milky Way, Twix. I launched Twix peanut butter, Dove chocolate in the US and in China. So super fun career, but it makes me so proud now to say that I'm able to come full circle back to that very early love of literature, and be able to be a published author is just truly remarkable. And you ask about the authors who've shaped me. It's hard to pinpoint just a few. There are so many. And I think about the authors I loved as a child, Madeline L'Engle or E.B. White or The Secret Garden, like these books that really shaped my childhood. But I will share one author in particular. And because he had a very important role to play in my life, I bring up John Irving. And the reason I do is because, and he might be before your time, I'm not sure if you'll know John Irving, but nevertheless, the story is that my husband and I met on a train going from New York to New Jersey. The reason I spoke to a stranger on the train on a Saturday night at 11 p.m. is because he was carrying John Irving's new book, and I wanted to find out what he thought of it. And he said to me, so if John Irvin happens to be listening, I want him to know that he created this marriage, and the twins that my husband and I have is all because of a John Irving book.
That's an epic love story. That's very romantic. So exciting to hear that. I'm curious because you kind of talked a little bit about right now, like your background and the different skills that you've acquired. So with your MBA in global marketing and digital strategy and an impressive history of public speaking, how did that influence your writing, if at all?
Yeah, so, and because you've read Goodbye Orchid and Orchid Blooming, but for the audience out there, a lot of the executive and career experiences I have, I impart upon my characters. So although my Goodbye Orchid series is inspired by combat wounded veterans, the characters themselves are not military veterans. In fact, what they are mirrors my career. So Orchid Page, 27-year-old Orchid Page, when we meet her in Orchid Blooming, she is an executive in the beauty industry, and she works in brand marketing, which is an experience I had on many confectionery brands. And then she meets, so what happens is she, more than anything, wants to win a work assignment to China to feel closer to the memory of her mother, because her mother passed when she was 12 years old. Both her parents did. A very tragic accident that really has followed her, that the trauma of that accident really followed her into adulthood. But to win this assignment, because it's so competitive, she really needs advertising experience. So she happens to meet the head of an ad agency. His name is Phoenix Walker, a 31-year-old, very successful, top of his game. And again, I'm really pulling from that experience I have working with ad agencies and having so much respect for the process of creating a brief, the strategy and the strategic thinking behind that. And I try to impart a bit of that on the pages of Orchid Blooming and Goodbye Orchid without it being, over the top or dry. It's just enough, I think, to give you a peek behind the scenes without going into it with too much, grand detail that's not needed.
Thank you. Yes. And this is just more for the audience, but since you gave a little bit of background on Orchid Blooming, so the audience knows, so Orchid Blooming is book 1 in the Goodbye Orchid series. Do they need to read Goodbye Orchid first, or Orchid Blooming, or vice versa? Or can they read one and read the other, just so they know?
It's a great question, Amber. And I'm getting input, like real time input from readers now that readers have read both. And so, yes, Goodbye Orchid came out at the end of 2020. And yet, the book that's launching next week, Orchid Blooming, chronologically happens before Goodbye Orchid. So it's a prequel. If readers were to read in chronological order, then it would be Orchid Blooming and then Goodbye Orchid. And I do think it makes a lot of sense to do it in that way. What I'll say is that each of them can be read completely as standalone. And it actually can be read in the other order because there are a lot of readers out there now who have read Goodbye Orchid. And when they go and read Orchid Blooming, what they're letting me know is it actually enhances the experience because they know what's coming and they pick up on all the little hidden Easter eggs that are in the story that foreshadow what's to come and really set the stage for what's to come. And it makes the anticipation even stronger. And so what readers have told me who have read Goodbye Orchid already and now are reading Orchid Blooming is that it makes them want to go back and reread Goodbye Orchid. What was the order you read them in, Amber?
Orchid Blooming was the first one. So I haven't actually read Goodbye Orchid yet, but I plan on because you have to read the first one and then it pulls you into the story of the second one. So yeah, I might have some questions that go back and forth between that today, but let's focus on Orchid Blooming. And so in this book, our main character Orchid, she's described as kind, generous, and I'm actually going to pull a couple quotes from the book just because I thought they were really great. But she's described as she's earned everything in her life, every scholarship, every opportunity, and this would be no different. The challenges from childhood had strengthened her for this battle. So right away, the audience and the reader gets this strong sense of, she's a very strong character and kind of badass. So reading from this that we get from her, what inspired you to make this character the protagonist of the series? And, when you wrote the first book, did you plan it on being a series, or did you kind of want to go back and write her story more?
Yeah. I mean, such great questions. And I would say I love the quote you picked because that idea of resilience was something really important for me to impart in Orchid Page. And that's part of, answering your first question, why create a character like Orchid Page? The fact that she could have such tragedy in her early childhood, but yet have that forge her into somebody stronger, I think is true in real life. I do think challenges make us stronger, and it's absolutely true for her. She's risen to the occasion, and yet there's still a bit of that trauma that follows her into adulthood. And then your second question was really great, but now I've lost my train of thought. So just repeat your second question again.
When you wrote the first book, did
Oh,
you did you know that you wanted to build on that character and tell her
oh,
story more?
yeah. It's such a good question how it came about that first Goodbye Orchid was published and then Orchid Blooming, the prequel, is coming out next week. So Goodbye Orchid, when it came out, it absolutely is a standalone. And what I found is that when I went to book clubs, people were asking me for more. They wanted to know about Orchid and Phoenix, how they met, what they had been through in more detail. And so I had already had some of that material because in order to write a fully fleshed out set of characters for Goodbye Orchid, I needed to have that backstory clear in my mind. And I had, tens of thousands of words written also. And so I was able to start from that as a nugget and then build on it. What was really interesting in the process was that I discovered unknown secrets to myself. The characters revealed things in Orchid Blooming that I didn't even know were there until I wrote the book. So I think that readers who've read Goodbye Orchid are going to find amazing, ahas and insights in Orchid Blooming, because I certainly did.
I love that. So keeping on the character of Orchid, in the book, she's described as being multiracial, and it is evident that Orchid's racial identity can affect her social encounters. And I'm going to quote another little passage from the book that best depicts this. In one of the chapters, Orchid says, "Today, she wouldn't have to face that rude question that suggested she was other, foreign, or exotic." And so, in my opinion, from reading, of a protagonist that has, multiracial and she's giving you this new perspective, I think we need to be reading more books like this that have protagonists that can shine a light on different cultures. And so, my question to you is, can you elaborate a little bit more on the importance of having a culturally diverse protagonist, and how did Orchid's cultural sense of belonging impact the story in any way?
Mm. It is such an important aspect, and it makes me really proud that the awards you mentioned, some of the awards have been for multicultural fiction. And so it was important for me to reflect that. And sometimes I hashtag own voices because I'm Chinese American, like Orchid is, and my twins are half Asian and half Caucasian, like Orchid is. And so I felt that that was important to reflect. And that passage you read is really poignant because that is true in my experience, certainly growing up and in the US, growing up in New Jersey, where, even in seemingly innocent questions can have that feeling of, oh, what's underlying the question of where are you from, or not accepting New Jersey as an appropriate answer. Where are you really from? Or how is it that you speak English without an accent? These types of questions, although they may be innocent, they actually, the underlying message there is that because I look different, I must be different in some exotic or other way. And I think just calling a little bit of consciousness, a little bit of attention so that people can maybe think for a second before asking those questions, and then realizing why they could be off-putting, I think is helpful. And I do find that important, that literature helps deepen empathy and provide perspectives into experiences that we might not have personally.
Yeah, and just from reading the book, this making her that way made her feel so real, and it made me connect more with her. So I just want to thank you, and I appreciate that part of her character. I loved that. So you tell the book from two perspectives, through orchids and through, as a reminder to the audience, handsome athlete and entrepreneur Phoenix Walker. Can you tell us why you decided to kind of share both of their stories and they intertwine? Why you chose to do it that way?
Yeah, each of their voices for me is quite clear in my mind. They have a different way of thinking, how they see the world. And actually, because of each of their deep internal emotional wounds, it makes the two of them have to work through things and grow to really find their way, together. And so I think it's really important to see both perspectives, and very true for not just Orchid Blooming, but also for Goodbye Orchid. And when I talk about wounds, what I'm talking about is, in Orchid's case, certainly the trauma she's carried into adulthood has led her to have issues around trust. Really being able to fully trust other people is something that she grapples with, and she's going to have to learn how to be vulnerable, how to overcome, the challenges that face her from that trauma to be able to have a very fulfilled life. And then on the other hand, Phoenix Walker, and what's interesting about both characters is on the surface, they seem like they have it together. So Phoenix, founder of an ad agency, very young entrepreneur, very successful, but yet On the inside, he worries that he can never live up to the legacy of his dad, who is a judge. And now that his dad has passed away, he'll never know whether he can live up to that legacy and whether his dad would be proud of the work that he's doing. So he's always striving for this ultra high standard and essentially has this perfectionism that is his, kind of internal flaw.
Yeah, and just so the audience knows, when you read the book, it's really clear that Orchid and Phoenix have undeniable chemistry, and Carol even describes the relationship in the book as transcending all class. And I just think that, in relation to the last question that we talked about, her being multiracial, it just really stood out to me on how their love is very pure. So I would, it was a very special connection between the two, and I won't give any more away because you guys have to get a copy yourself and read it for yourself. But we're going to switch gears here to a little bit more on a serious note, and Carol, you touched on it a bit, but in the story, it's very clear that the theme of trauma, grief, and PTSD is up at the forefront. And so I'm going to read a quote from the book that kind of depicts this, that I really liked. So in the book it says, "Orchid stared at the scarred skin and twisted muscle. Without wanting to, she pictured the trauma that must have caused these wounds. The possibilities unspooled memories for when she was a little girl. Locked wheels skidding over ice, the explosion of metal, my fault, my secret." So you get little tidbits like this from Orchid throughout the book, and you can just feel her pain. And so my question to you, Carol, is, can you talk about your motivation to highlight this topic and this type of pain, and how you chose to discuss it in a very respectful and meaningful way, because it came across that way to us?
That's really great. I'm really glad to hear that the respect came through. Because the series is inspired by combat wounded veterans, by wounded warriors, and I have so much respect for the experience that they've been through, the challenges they've had to overcome, I took the research for this incredibly seriously. And so this topic, the first part of your question is why, shine a light on PTSD awareness. It is something that wounded warriors who are returning from combat absolutely face. Whereas in Goodbye Orchid, there's another aspect of what wounded warriors can face that is dealt with there. But here, the idea of giving hope to people who might have PTSD or facing challenges, it doesn't even have to be specifically PTSD. Giving hope and inspiring empathy for people who are having challenges is really what I'm aiming to do with the pages of Orchid Blooming and Goodbye Orchid. And I love that you picked up the fact that it comes from a place of deep respect. So the research, took multiple parts. In fact, there's desk research, so reading everything I could and watching videos and really understanding as deeply as I could what that experience might be like. And then on top of that, having firsthand people that I could ask, that I could speak with, and I could give the manuscript to get feedback was incredibly helpful. And so I thank a lot of people in my acknowledgements, including psychologists. There's a clinical director of a trauma center, and wounded warriors who've read the story, loved it, endorsed it, and also are helping me shape it so that it can be as authentic and as respectful and as helpful as possible.
Yeah, and it definitely came across that way. It was eye-opening, and also I could connect a lot with it. So thank you for sharing her story in that way. But I want to dig a little bit deeper into the process of healing when it comes with trauma. And so in this book, Orchid truly does blossom, and she finds multiple ways to heal. Some including she connects to her Chinese heritage by taking Mandarin lessons. She's stepping it up by pursuing competitive job opportunities. And then she even has a more personal way of dealing with it by breathing techniques and mantras. So I found all of that very helpful and very inspiring. But I really want to focus on a part of the book that it stood out to me, and it was the chapter with practitioner Dr. Todd. I don't want to give too much away for listeners, but Orchid does see Dr. Todd, and In this chapter, he provides her with a unique form of journaling that I had never heard of before. So I'm going to read a little passage from the book to give you guys, listeners, a little bit more on this journaling technique. So Dr. Todd says, if you decide to try it again, you don't have to write about their accident, only if you want to. One of my clients writes the ending she wishes happened, as if her life were fiction. It gives her power. Would you like to try that? And Orchid does try that, and she writes the ending that she wanted to happen. And I was bawling at the end of this chapter. It was a very emotional chapter. I had never thought to do a technique in this way. And it evoked a very powerful sense of ownership over one's emotions. So can you tell us a little bit about this research when it comes to the character of Dr. Todd, specifically this journaling technique, and then if you have any other messages for people struggling with trauma or PTSD?
I love that. And that chapter and that particular passage is so emotional for me that every time I read it, let's say I was editing or I was just doing proofreading, every time I read that passage, I would tear up myself. So I do find that incredibly emotional, and thank you for pointing that out. So it has a very specific origin story to it. And one of the questions you asked is, how did I craft this character of Dr. Todd? And it's probably an amalgamation of lots of the research, the personal experiences. But one thing I found really heartwarming was when I gave that chapter to a clinician, somebody who's trained as a licensed clinical social worker, who works as a therapist. He said to me that he loved the way that was depicted because it was, on the one hand, clinically accurate. On the other hand, it also was so human and had the sense of humor. And he said that's not easy to get that balance of both of those things. And that meant the world to me that, he gave me that feedback. But in terms of the story itself, this technique of journaling and writing your own ending, I want to credit my developmental editor, Caroline Levitt. She's a New York Times bestselling author of With or Without You and Cruel Beautiful World, many, many amazing books. She has been such an angel to me in working with me on my novels. She actually talks about this experience when she was touring for her book With or Without You. She explained that she had been in a coma herself. And when she came out of the coma, she was having these residual effects where things that had happened when she was unconscious in the coma, if she didn't remember them consciously, but if she saw them, let's say a pattern of fabric that looked like what the nurses wore, or the smell of soup that was being served when she was in this coma, those things would trigger terrible side effects for her. And when she tried to heal from that, the therapist did suggest journaling and writing about the experience. And she tried. She actually wrote an entire book that was about, being in the coma exactly the way she experienced it. And it didn't help her. But she went, I think, if I have the details right, she went to another therapist who said, well, why don't you try changing the ending? And when she did that, that's the book With or Without You, that healed her. And that was so powerful to me. And so I put this little glimpse in there because I think it's incredible. It's not just fiction. It actually has helped people.
Yeah, and from reading it from a reader's perspective, not only was that specific technique very helpful, but the entire chapter of Orchid having the courage to go to talk to someone, that's a scary thing. Not everyone can do that. So right away, I felt her growth as a character and her strength. And so all in all, that was a very pivotal moment, I think, in the book. And if I remember correctly, I think later on, Phoenix even says, like, Orchid, it's okay to ask for help. Like, you've done everything your whole life on your own. And like, I feel like sometimes people forget that. They forget that it's okay to ask for help, And so staying kind of on the same topic of trauma, we alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the theme of trust is really intertwined with tragedy in this book. And in the book, Phoenix even says regarding Orchid, worse, her childhood trauma meant that she didn't trust easily. So as a reader, we are constantly getting that the trust theme. And I'm curious, what does trust mean to you in regards to Orchid's development as a character? Um, and how did this central idea shape the projection of the series?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And there's the idea of trust for Orchid, but there's also the idea of how they trust each other. Trust is a two-way street. It's not something you do by yourself. I think that the reason this theme, and so let me try to answer, and you can tell me if your question is a little different, you want me to answer something a little different. But when I reflect on this theme, I think the reason it's so important to me is because I truly want to believe that even when there's been a slight or a mistake or a wrong or that something has gone awry in a relationship, that you can still learn to trust again, that you can still find a way to heal, that there are second chances in life. And I think that it's such a marker of her growth. This story is very much her growth, and the story has some of the awards that have been won have been for women's fiction because of the character growth in Orchid. And she's such a fierce, strong, resilient female, as you had said. And so there's probably nothing harder than overcoming that fear of trusting others. That is a big, big challenge and ask for that character to get there.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I wanted to bring up that question. Sorry for the feedback too. I think my phone's making a high pitched sound. I will mute myself after I ask my next question. But anyway, switching gears here. Uh, Thank you so much, Carol. You completely answered that question perfectly. But I want to switch gears just a little bit. So I noticed that from both your bio and your books, I can see that you are very environmentally friendly, and you are a climate reality leader. And your main character, Orchid, goes as far as to convince local restaurants to try to reduce single use plastics, among other things. She's very environmentally friendly. So, can you tell us what sustainability means to you and how this topic has impacted your characters?
Yeah, thanks so much for this question. I feel like ever since I've been a little kid, I just have this fine tuned sense of waste and really not liking waste. It doesn't feel right. And then on top of that, when I got my engineering major was in industrial engineering. Industrial engineering is all about what's the most efficient way you can run things. Well, efficiency means that there should be no waste. And so when material goods are wasted, or when people's behavior is wasteful, it is something I feel like I'm extra ultra sensitive to. And I think over time I've become more and more aware that not everyone is like that, and that I have this, kind of sixth sense about this. And so I started to pursue ways in which I could make a difference, so I became more and more aware that I am sustainability minded, and then trying to find ways that I could action that it doesn't just become a belief, but it becomes something I can change. And so I think I've been moving from an awareness to action to advocacy continuum. And the way that's played out is first taking my own personal actions. So for instance, in our house, we compost. When I go out to a restaurant, my friends all know I'm the one with a Tupperware in my purse, because if there's leftovers, I don't want to take anything disposable. I want to take it in my own container. And then over time, I've also taken on assignments. So I was on a Mars Ambassador Program assignment with Antashka in Ireland, where I worked with it's an amazing program where basically they pay for all the travel, the salary, everything for associates to work with nonprofits around the world. So I had the opportunity to shape the strategy, the market research plans, the branding for the environmental education unit of Ireland. Incredible experience. And then, yes, getting my climate reality leader training, being trained in economics and mutuality, and then having the good fortune to be able to work on things like finance for a sustainable tomorrow. What are the ways that we can apply the rigors of finance to achieving more sustainability goals? Or I'm currently working on digital for sustainability. How do we apply digital as an accelerant to be able to achieve our sustainability goals? All of that, I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to have that. And I think what really, the older I get, the more I want my values to align with my actions and my behavior. And so I find that there's this really strong link, the values of my company, the values of the things I'm working on, linking with my own personal values. And so I suppose it was somewhat natural for it to show up in my character as well. I love that example that you pointed out of Cirque, where she, because I'm the one that's known for bringing Tupperware to a restaurant, that she's creating the circularity of having reusable containers instead of disposable containers when people take takeout. And it's like, why not? We should be able to do that. If we can dream it up, we absolutely can make it happen. Humanity's amazing. I think we have solutions to the issues in front of us. And it's just a matter of focus and creating some patterns so that we change how we behave.
Yeah, and I'm a huge sustainability person. I've grown up the same way, and so it was really fun to read that. And that was one of my favorite parts of the book was Orchid influencing Phoenix, because you could see him changing too. Like he'd be like, "Oh, you're right. Why haven't I done it this way?" And that's how it is in my life as well. Like the people I meet, they're like, "Oh yeah, why not bring your own Tupperware or bring your own bags to the grocery store?" So I thought that was very real and very inspirational. So thank you for that. I just want to remind everyone in the audience. We have about 10 to 15 minutes left with Carol, so I want to leave time for Q&A for you guys. So if you have any questions, now's your time to jump on stage, and you can do so. Oh, we got one from Brian. Thank you. Let me accept that. All right, Brian. Hi.
Hi. I was listening in uh, to the show because I was in a position to just listen. And, oh, I'm going to come on camera. Um, so, um, hi. Um, yeah. So, my, um, my question is, and reading is definitely one of my weaknesses. I will mention that. But my question is, did you grow up in Jersey your whole life? Uh, I'm actually a New Jersey person myself too, so
Oh, great.
it's a small
Where?
world.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I grew up mostly in New Jersey and also a little bit in Maryland. But tell me, where are you from in New Jersey? And also, I have to respond to your comment about being not a strong reader. One of the things I hear from readers who read Goodbye Orchid and Orchid Blooming is that they're incredible page turners. And people have said to me that they had not picked up a book in years, and this is what broke that streak for them. That picking up these books made them want to read again, and that's really high praise that warms my heart. But tell me where you're from in New Jersey.
Edison.
Oh, okay, yeah. Not far. I'm in Morris County, so not far from you.
Oh,
That's great.
I've
How
been
did you
there
find this
before.
program?
Uh, I've been on Fireside for a few months, and it's very easy to find shows on here right now because there's not a lot going on here. So I happen to pop on, and I do my own shows on here as well. Um, so um,
Fun.
yeah,
Well,
Well,
great
thank
to
you so
connect with
much,
you.
Brian. Thank you for jumping up on stage. And thank you for chatting with me and Carol. So
yeah.
yeah.
One another question would be, how long is the book too?
Yeah, so the book is if you listen to it on audiobook, it's just over 7 hours. I think it's right around there. And if you read it, I think it's something like 264 pages is coming to me, which might sound daunting, but literally I've had people say that they've read it in one sitting. Where once they start and are into the characters, they can't stop. I get emails in the middle of the night, people saying, "You kept me up way past my bedtime because I needed to know what happened." And then maybe I'll just share one other pointer for Brian, since you are in Edison. This weekend on Saturday, I'm signing at a bookstore. Thunder Road Books is in Spring Lake, New Jersey. So if you want to come for the launch party, there's going to be treats and an author talk and book signing. It'll be really fun, and it's a beautiful bookstore. I'd love to see you there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. And I see that we also have Debbie who wants to ask a question. She's on stage. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, Amber. Hi, Carol. It's such a pleasure to listen in on the conversation. Amber, you're asking fantastic questions. You've answered a lot of the questions. Well, you've asked, Phil has answered a lot of the questions that I had. But so curious, Carol, it's clear from listening to you that there's a lot of, it's clear to me, maybe correct me if this is wrong. There's a lot of you in Orchid, or perhaps vice versa. So what's the question? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? And I'm just curious too, do you speak Mandarin? I know you had a piece in the book where you talk about her taking Mandarin classes, and you had all these Mandarin words in there, and I thought, wow, okay. So where did that come from?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I do think there are aspects of Orchid that are, pull from autobiographical experiences I've had. Of course, I'm not exactly Orchid, and Orchid's not exactly me. It's a blend of some experiences I've had along with just imagination and fiction and make believe, so it's a mix of those things. But the Mandarin piece and the moving to China or wanting to have a trip to China, that is something that is shared in my real life. So part of my experience when I was running Dove brand, Dove chocolate, was being able to move to China with my twins, my husband and I. We spent 2 years on assignment there in Beijing. And therefore, before I accepted the assignment, or actually right when I accepted the assignment, I decided I needed to learn more Mandarin. I really didn't know any, actually, not even more. I needed to learn Mandarin. So the first thing I did after I accepted my assignment was I bought Rosetta Stone. I don't know if you remember that. It's like a language program where I was listening to it in my car to try to teach myself Chinese. And then once I got to Beijing, I had some rudimentary Mandarin, but it really accelerated from there because my company was so generous to provide a one-on-one Berlitz tutor, not just for myself, but even for my husband. And then my twins were in the International School of Beijing, where they took Mandarin something like 4 or 5 days a week. So all of us actually had this basic grasp of the language. I learned really fast, actually, and I gave myself a lot of pressure to do that. Since I look Asian, I thought that I would be expected to speak Chinese, that people would mistake me and think that I was Chinese. And so I put a ton of pressure on myself. And an interesting thing that happened was that my coworkers, were so surprised how fast I was able to learn language. And I explained my rationale that I, put that pressure on myself because I thought that people would expect me to speak Chinese. And they started laughing and they said, "We wouldn't mistake you for being Chinese." I'm like, "What do you mean? Both my parents are from Shanghai, even though I was born and raised in New Jersey. I'm ancestrally Chinese, genetically or whatever." And they said, "Well, yeah, maybe, but nobody would mistake you for being Chinese national because the way you dress, the way you cut your hair, the way you carry yourself and your mannerisms give it away." And I thought, oh, maybe I didn't need to put all that pressure on myself. So that was a really funny insight.
Thank you.
That's really interesting. I love that. One other question, Amber, and I'm sorry, I don't want to hog time, but I have one other question. So I saw on social media that you posted composite pictures of Orchid and Phoenix, and I had to close my eyes because at that time I hadn't read the books. I thought, no, I can't see them because I want to, visualize them myself, and it great now that I'm reading it. But so how did that come about? Is that did you have input in that, or was that just the artist's interpretation based on their reading, or how?
Oh, it's so great. Thank you for noticing that, Debbie. You are amazing. First of all, just have to thank Adventures by the Book and Novel Network, and all of you are just so professional and amazing at highlighting authors and bringing authors and readers together. I love that question, and it has a funny story behind it. So at work, I am on our digital technologies leadership team, which means I'm pretty interested in new emerging technologies. And so the idea of using AI for art, you probably have, heard about it being discussed in the news. I tried one of these AI programs. It's called Art Breeder, if I remember correctly. It's free. It allows you to basically morph from a starting point, and then you can shift all kinds of things like eye color or expression or how open the eyes or the mouth are. I played around with it for a little bit, and created characters that kind of, fit the description of Orchid and Phoenix. And that is what I posted, is an AI generated. It's basically me asking AI to create Phoenix Walker and Orchid Page, and that's what came out.
Bravo, well done. I really, really enjoyed that. So I'm looking forward to your book release next week for the general public, and I won't say any more. Thanks so much, and I'll enjoy listening. I'll get off the stage now.
Thank you, Debbie. And thank you, Brian. You guys had great questions. Feel free to jump on stage in the last couple minutes that we're here with Carol. But I want to finish on a couple questions. So, Carol, let's talk about your readers and your fans. There's a quote in the book from Phoenix that I absolutely love, and I think it kind of leads into my question really well. So I'm going to go ahead and share it for all of our listeners. But in the book, he says, "I don't consider this a one-way mentorship. I can learn as much from you as you can from me." And I think this is so true in most every relationship in all of our lives. So as an author, Carol, what have you learned about the writing craft that your readers have taught you?
Two things come to mind. One is, of course, I think the reason that craft is so important is the clarity of the message. And is it landing? Is the reader getting the sensorial and emotional details that are really painting the picture? But they don't need every last detail, because readers will fill in a lot. So I think that's a really interesting insight. But then secondly, an insight I've had is because readers react differently to different parts of books. And even if I'm in a book club, people might have a different opinion about the same character or the same passage, the same chapter. I have this insight now that it's not just what's on the page, but so much of what people personally bring and what they personally resonate with. And I think that insight helps authors take a little of the pressure off, because there are a lot of great reviews, but sometimes there are not so great reviews. And it helps me certainly to say, well, it could be what that person's bringing to the page as well. And so it takes a little bit of the responsibility off. So those are two learnings I've had from readers. I think there's another part to your question, though, that I have forgotten now.
No, I think that's it. But your answer actually leads me to my next question, because there might be some aspiring writers in the audience, maybe me. What advice do you have to us or your younger writer self? Any piece of advice that you'd like to give out?
So my alma mater recently interviewed me about the idea of reinvention and perseverance. And I do think there's something, and lots of authors talk about this, the perseverance, because of course in writing, there is a lot of rejection, unfortunately. There's such a long tail of titles. There's something like 1 million titles out there on Amazon. And so I think if it's something that's passionate for you, then just keep going. And one thing that helps me a lot is being clear on my why. I often, when I speak at writers' conferences, I teach a course on author brand or personal brand. I'm actually speaking on this topic at Novelists Inc. in a few weeks in St. Petersburg's, in St. Pete's Beach, Florida. And the question I start with when people want to think about their brand is, what's your inspiring purpose? What's the reason you do what you do beyond the obvious profit or functional purposes? And when you have clarity of that, the reason I bring this up is because it fuels you to keep going. So for me, for instance, when I try to articulate it for myself, and it's not an easy exercise, it requires some iteration, some thought, maybe even feedback from people who know your work. What I ended up articulating was that I aim to inspire hope and empathy for people and planet. And because that's personally meaningful for me, maybe if the writing's getting a little tough, the editing's getting a little tough, I just remind myself of that true north, and it fuels me and it fills me with energy and it gives me the want to keep going.
I love that. That's so inspirational. And I think that rings true for a lot of writers. You can get really deep into it and, you might get down on yourself, but you got to remember why you're doing it and the love of it. So thank you for that advice. And what's next on the horizon for you? Is it another book in the Goodbye Orchid series or something else? Or you don't have to share if you don't want to.
Oh, yeah, no, it's a good question. In fact, those book clubs I described who wanted to know more about what happened before the first page of Goodbye Orchid, Some book clubs also asked me for more after the last page of Goodbye Orchid. And so I have delivered. There is a sequel on its way. It's in the editing process. Sometime in 2023, there is going to be a sequel for to fill out the trilogy, the Goodbye Orchid trilogy now.
Cool. How exciting! I can't wait for that chat. Awesome, I can't wait. And is there anything else that you want to talk about that we haven't mentioned today?
I don't know if it's helpful for people to know where to reach me if they're looking for me. And I think one simple spot, well, maybe two simple spots. One is my website, carolvandenhende.com. That's carolvandenhende.com. And there you can see my events, my information about my books. There's a media kit out there for press. I've been doing a press tour and interviews. And then the second place is my link tree, linktr.ee/CVDH. And that's helpful because it has links to all my socials, by the book. It actually has a link to the event tonight. That's the very first link on my link tree is tonight's event.
Thank you so much, Carol. And to the audience, I'd like to end our chat with Carol with a final quote from the book. I think it's one that kind of depicts the hopeful message that the book, is giving off. So I'll go ahead and read it. It says, "Life isn't easy. Who hasn't suffered injustice, misunderstanding, or hurt on a schoolyard playground, been disappointed at work, or challenged as a parent? That's what humans are built for. Brains are resilient." Thank you so much, Carol. Congratulations on your book, Orchid Blooming. You guys got to get your copies. It is very good, and you got to get the first book too, by Orchid, so you can complete the series. And remember, this is part 5 of a 6-part series. So we hope that you'll join us in 2 weeks for the 6th and final part of our Fireside Chat on Thursday, September 22nd, same time, 4 p.m., with the novelist Ellen Meeropol. And she'll be joining us, and we'll be discussing her book, The Lost Women of Azalea Court. And I think she's even in the audience right now. Yes. Hi, Ellen. Can't wait to chat with you next week. Thank you so much for being here. And I think Madeline Martin is also here. So thank you guys so much for coming and supporting Carol. We love it when you guys are here. And if you want to hear more from Carol or me on Fireside, you can just click on our icons and you can follow us, and you'll be alerted anytime that we are part of a program, something to think about. And if you aren't familiar with Adventures by the Book, please check out our website, adventuresbythebook.com. We host a variety of events, not just Fireside. We do Zoom, live and in-person travels. So really, we have it all. So, we'd like to see you there for more events. And once again, thank you so much, Carol. So what will be your next adventure by the book? Thank you, guys. Have a great day.